Ok, podemos empezar. Bueno, buenas tardes. Bueno, me gustaría al principio de verdad agradecer a Valeria por la invitación. Yo creo que no tenéis la idea de cuánto me alegra estar aquí otra vez con vosotros, porque hay gente que no vi tanto tiempo desde antes de la pandemia, ¿sabes? Es verdad un poco emocionante. Y muchas gracias por la invitación, con mucho gusto que vengan a Argentina para discutir con vosotros, es un placer. Muchas gracias, Valeria. Y bueno, al principio la primera cosa que yo tendría a decirles es que yo preparé mi texto en inglés. Pero viendo ahora la dinámica de la discusión, yo creo que hubiera hecho mejor si lo hubiera traducido o intentado quizás escribir estas notas en español. Entonces, yo hablaré en inglés, pero después podemos cambiar para el idioma que sea el más interesante para todos, para nosotros. Entonces, lo que yo hago es, bueno, yo que lo hago es, primera y única ley, yo sigo todo lo que Valeria dice para que... No. Entonces, Valeria me lo dice porque yo la pregunté, bueno, ¿cómo hacemos la dinámica de esta discusión del libro de Tobías? Y Valeria me dice, bueno, tú haces una presentación de más o menos 15-20 minutos y después abrimos la discusión en general. Entonces, esta es la idea. Yo hago una especie, no una presentación del libro de Tobías, más una presentación de algunas ideas, no cuestiones, pero algunas cosas que me llamaron un poco la atención cuando estaba leyendo el libro de Tobías. ¿Está bien? Aquí está el libro, todavía todos...
Yo lo voy a...
No, pero...
Sí, es un componente más.
Ah, ok. Está, there's delay. Oh, yeah.
Ahora,
Okay. Well, then I'll switch now to English. Then after that, we can come back to Spanish and or stick to English. Well, we will see. Well, then these are really just some notes on Tobias's book, Free Will and the Rebel Angels in Medieval Philosophy. Okay. And well, the first thing that caught my attention in Tobias Hoffmann's new book was its structure, which, interestingly enough, does not follow a linear path. Rather, the book is constructed, at least according to my reception, of course, as a kind of helical road, a fusilli, if you like, that progresses in circular fashion and in three very clear stages. In the first movement, the first step of the fusilli, in the first movement, a general theme and a fundamental one for the medieval philosophy is posed, the theme of the freedom of the will, or more precisely, of how to substantiate. And the positions of more than 20 authors, that's really a very big number of figures that appear in Tobias's book. And in the positions of more than 20 authors located between Anselm of Canterbury in the early 12th century and William of Ockham in the first half of the 14th century, on the theme are presented in a linear fashion and according to a basic tripartition of positions, which will be repeated throughout the work in intellectualism, voluntarism, and intermediate positions. On the second level, in the second step of the fusilli, on the second level, a select number of those authors, namely 11, are revisited, and with them we tread another philosophical path related to the first one, but concerning the source of evil. Finally, a third level of reflection is reached, in which we find ourselves again in the company of basically the same initial selections of authors. On this last step of the investigation, the connection between the two initial stages takes place. This is made possible by the choice of a, so to speak, paradigmatic case that involves, in a unique way, freedom and evil. That of the demons or the rebel angels, who, and about these all authors, from Anselm to Occam agree, not only freely do will, that he choose the evil choice, but moreover, do it under optimal epistemic conditions and obstinately, that is, without being able to stop doing it. Evidently, I have no way to reconstruct here in detail what happens in each of the levels of the investigation that Tobias's book presents us with. I will restrict myself, therefore, to some observations that I hope will not be too sparse. With regard to the first level, the general investigation of the theme of the freedom of the will over a period of 250 years, I would like first to note that Tobias's reconstruction of the intellectual panorama of those years of philosophical reflection shows that the problem of freedom of the will is seen in that context from a very specific perspective, namely through a viewpoint that starts from the presupposition, I think, that yes, there's freedom, and yes, we are free. In other words, for better or worse, medieval philosophy moved in a realm that, unless I'm mistaken, remains inaccessible for what we would call today hard incompatibilism, which simply denies the existence of freedom. Well, now the question, is there a limit of the reflection? Perhaps. And is it motivated by issues of an ultimately religious nature? Again, perhaps, but not necessarily so. But it may be also the case that the medieval authors already had the intuition that marks, for instance, Peter von Inwagen's contemporary reflection on the question of the free will. The conceptual revision implied and required by the hard incompatibilism, that means the conceptual revision implied and required by the idea that there's no freedom, is so radical, but so radical that it makes for this very reason, profoundly implausible. It would be too far from our conceptual scheme, not natural conceptual scheme. In other words, it would be in the end a thesis entangled in an overly revisionist metaphysics. Still, well, that's the first point. I think, well, we need to have this in mind, that we are dealing with a period which I think it's more, its extension is less broad than that in which we discussed today the question of the freedom of the will, because there is one position, the hard incompatibilism, which we will find in contemporary debate very interesting authors defending it. Well, Galen Strawson perhaps would be one of the first names that come to my mind. And this is something different because we don't have this interlocutor in the medieval period. But now the question is, why don't we have this interlocutor? Perhaps there is an easy answer to say, well, because of the religious issues. But perhaps there is also a philosophical, more interesting answer that will, well, because they said that to think ourselves as not being free is something that we barely can do. It barely makes sense. It would imply a revision of our conceptual scheme that would be simply very hard. We would not understand ourselves again as human beings. Okay, well, again, still on this first moment of the investigation, I would like to at least try to restate here, for the sake of our discussion, the basic conceptual framework of the proposed tripartition of the positions at stake. It's a matter, to recall, of intellectualist, voluntarist, and intermediate position. The first thing to note about this list is that, in essence, it does not seem to portray three conceptual distinct positions on the subject of freedom, but only two: intellectualist and voluntarist. In effect, intermediate positions seem to correspond for Tobias, with which I am in perfect agreement, not exactly to alternatives to intellectualism or voluntarism, but rather to situations in which, for example, someone wants to be, let's say, an intellectualist, but ends up being obliged at a very fundamental moment of his theory of freedom to accept a typically voluntary stance, or vice. In a word, the so-called intermediate position has at bottom a certain air of inconsistency. If this seems to be a big problem, and indeed it is, such an impression could be, if not mitigated, at least made a little bit less dramatic or exclusive by noticing that the other positions in play also have their problems, and that they are also problems of inconsistency. Indeed, the question of freedom seems to be such that in the first place, its difficulty consists in the fact that even before the search for an answer to the question about the truth of any theory that claims to explain this, one has to read, and we are still reaching, one has to read a coherent theory that justifies it. I think that we can't find neither nor. That's the problem. It's not a question about is this true or is this false? Is this coherent or not? It's a previous question. It's more bottom philosophical question, and that makes the issue very interesting, of course. I think that the problem here can be put in terms of the relationship between the notions of freedom and justification. This is not, literally speaking, the way Tobias actually proceeds, but it seems to me that this is a perspective that is perfectly in accord with the tenor of his texts. In this sense, the intellectualist would be described as one who emphasizes the link between these two terms. That is, he emphasizes that a free action must also be epistemically justified. And now comes the interesting point, because it's not that the voluntarist doesn't think so. However, he seems to insert a new fact into the problem. His position would consist in agreeing that there is a relationship between freedom and justification, but at the same time denying something that it's implicit in the rival discourse, namely the idea that the justification presented as what guarantees the legitimacy of an action as a free action must be the strongest of the justification epistemically available to the subject considering the action. It's not a question about justify or not justify, it's a question about what justification. And I think the voluntarism is saying, yes, of course, we need to justify it, but what? But perhaps we don't need to justify it with a better reason. And the intellectualists say, no, it only makes sense with justified with a better reason. Now, that's I think, my way of putting the question. Taking up one element of Tobias' investigation, something that in fact guides his text at several points in which a more, so to speak, distanced evaluation, the interpreter's evaluation of the historical position is presented, we could say that it is a matter in the dialogue between intellectualists and voluntarists of different ways in which what is considered as the conformity between judgment and volition can be understood. The formulation of this axiom, so to speak, is as follows, and I use Tobias' formulation. There are many places in the book you'll find this formulation. The formulation is willing must conform to what reason judges as to be willed. Okay, I repeat, willing must conform to what reason judges as to be willed. Okay, let's explore a little bit this question. Now, the most immediate reading of the meaning of this expression is, and it also seems to be the case in Tobias' investigation, in the sense that it expresses an intellectualist position on the freedom of the will. Free action is that which obeys what reason says should be done. The connection between freedom and justification is manifest. If it did not obey reason, an action would not be free, but perfectly casual, random, or in other terms, and this is a very important point in my text, is the idea that the relation between freedom and rationality sorry, if it did not obey reason, an action would be not free, but perfectly causal or random. Or in other terms, it would place itself outside the game of offering and recognized reasons and motives, the realm of inferences and evaluation. In short, it would place itself outside the very space of rationality. And this, in fact, consists of a burden that neither of the interlocutors in the field is willing to accept. For the intellectualist, the consequence is clear. If free action is to be understood as a properly human action, and in this sense as a justified action, it must follow what the intellect interprets to be the best justified course of action. But now this question, but isn't an action justified? Yes or not? Isn't an action justified by a reason that is known not to be, that most strongly prescribes what it should be performed? Is this kind of justification, after all, not a justification? By choosing only a so-called second best justification, an action or a justification of an action, it falls it completely outside the realm of the space or the space of saying and asking why, outside the realm of rationality? I don't think so. It seems not. And this is the position of the voluntarist, who does not deny the relation between freedom and justification, but denies that free action has to take place according to the most robust of the justifications epistemically available to the subject in order for it to be considered a justified and thus rational action. Well, returning to the formulation of the conformity thesis between judgment and volition in terms of the will that must conform to what reason judges have to be willed. This is indeed an ambiguous expression. And it's naturally ambiguous. I mean, it's not that it was only ambiguously formulated. It's not the Bible's fault, because it's ambiguous because we can understand that to what reason judges have to be willed. It can mean either to that, which, or less specific to something that reason judges as to be willed. In other terms, one can mean that the will must conform to one thing, one specific justification. When I say must conform to what reason judges as to be willed, to what this specific thing, that reason presents to it, or to something. You can read it also in a more broad way to say must conform to what reason just has to be willed, to something that reason judges to be willed, as a certain justification that reason presents to it. In the first formulation, the intellectualist is supported. In the second, the voluntarist. But how does each of them justify its own position, its own interpretation of the conformity thesis? In a way, and I believe that the formidable historical survey presented by Tobias confirmed this, according to which justifications are, perhaps we would say unfortunately, in which justifications are unfortunately formulated as a rule as reduction to absurdity of the opposite stances. That's it. The justification of intellectualism consists, in the end of the day, in demonstrating the inconsistency of voluntarism and vice versa. In one case, to put it very briefly, the inconsistency would consist in considering as irrational and therefore non-free actions for which one can offer justifications, even if one takes into account that these are not the only one available. In the other case, the inconsistency would consist in considering as free and therefore as rational an action whose becoming is already, as it were, perfectly guaranteed beforehand by an instance distinct from the will, the intellect. In one case, it operates with two incompatible standards of rationality. in the other with two incompatible standards of freedom. The problem then concerns at bottom the relationship between free action and rational action. Neither of the interlocutors is willing to assume that there is no link between these two things. Yet, both see their respective opponents as unable to sustain that link. In one case, because one cannot see how something non-free, the intellect, question. Is really everybody considering the intellect non-free in this context? I leave the question for you. Okay. But in one case, because one cannot see how something non-free, the intellect, could be the cause of freedom in another, i.e., how it could cause that something it does not have to be in another. In the other case, because one makes completely opaque the reason, or rather the reasonableness of doing something that even if one reasons for doing it, one knows at the same time that there are better reasons for assuming a different course of action. Okay, I have a justification, but I have another justification which is better. So by this investigation does not solve this problem. Oh, but this is not the problem.
Don't find this.
Do not solve this problem, nor is his claim to solve it, and nor is his claim to do it. Rather, it shows in a formidable way how the problem has been thought about over many generations of authors, and how it seems, despite the effort of medieval scholars, and in this, they are not in a very fundamentally way worse than in the worst position than we are. I think. I mean, what I want to say, you don't do the results of the call, but nobody does. The question remains, or to return to von Inwagen, freedom remains a mystery. Well, I would like to make two further observations based on my reading of the Bible. The first concerns the special case and the more problematic, the even more problematic than the already sufficiently problematic human case, the case of the rebel angels. And now this is, I think, something I've really learned, and I don't know, perhaps it would be interesting for you to see how one can learn from the Bible book. Perhaps it was something that concerned only me, but I really always thought that the voluntarist was in a better position than the intellectualists when it came to explain the sin of the rebel angels. After all, the fact that these were, let's say, epistemically complete or perfect subjects would be absolutely irrelevant to the voluntarist. Well, the Bible book taught me that I was wrong. I was really wrong. For the issue does not become less problematic for the voluntarist because, in fact, voluntarism does not seem to be able to account for the obstinacy in error that is part of the state of affairs that it described. Okay, if it's easy to the voluntarist to explain why that choice has been chosen, he has the problem to be, I think, absolutely unable to explain how that choice cannot be undone. No? Because if ultimately any reason can be a reason for doing something, you just need to have a reason, it seems, then any reason can also be a reason for not doing something. And all adherence to reason is lost. Thus, to be able to want something different for what one wants now, to be the contrary obstinacy becomes a consequence of to be the contrary, to be able to, I repeat, to be able to want something different for what's now, the contrary, the absolutely contrary of business becomes a consequence of voluntarism. I really don't see how can you stick to voluntarism and explain this obstinacy. And I think the Bible told it very well. I really learned. I thought the voluntarism was really in a better position. but it's not. Finally, I would like to point out to a connection that was incited in me by Tobias's book, and this is really a perspective, okay? I'm just putting something in the air. And whose exploration may be interesting in the context of investigation of the medieval philosophical landscape. In other words, the image of the rebel angel seems to have been coined on the basis of the image of the philosopher advocating at that historical moment what Alain de Libera has already called an ethical Aristotelianism, or vice versa, I don't know. No, perhaps the insertion of the figure of the rebel angel in the philosophical discourse was at least partially grounded, partially on the image of the, so to speak, radically naturalistic philosopher who believes unjustified, and this is not a problem because he is not a perfect from the epistemic point of view. He can err. There's not a problem at all. We don't have this problem of how can someone that knows everything that can be known by him no, but anyway, this is a guy who speaks he's in a very naturalistic from a very naturalistic point of view, and who believes unjustifiably that he can be happy ex puris naturalibus, that is, from his own natural capacities. When one realizes this, one can think of placing the discourse on rebel angels in dialogue with investigations, very interesting investigations, whose content is as much philosophical as in a certain way sociological, such as those of Luca Bianchi in Il Vescovi Philosophy, or François Xavier Coutalas in Insolente Liberté, and Alain de Libera in Pensée au Moyen Âge. Is the devil a philosopher, or our philosopher demon? I give myself the right to hope that there will be no lack of medieval documents, philosophical documents, that makes it possible, starting from Tobias's book, to think about this question as well. This how now we can put from at the same moment, not philosophical and somehow sociological perspective, this what seems to me really a very striking similarity between what is the sin of the demon and what is the sin of the philosopher, from the philosopher that the guy who is being thought as this ethical Aristotelian, okay? And well, I think that's just 3 points. The first point, I'm trying to, I really apologize if the first part was a little bit more conceptual than a reconstruction of the structure of the book with the authors. But what I was trying to think about was this kind of how to conceptually reconstruct the discussion Tobias presents to us in a very in this wonderful presentation. And the two other points, the point about why I think it's interesting, for me it was really interesting to see how the voluntary is called, how can he think about this idea of obstinity? You need to have something ex machina. I don't think we can get to this thesis from an analysis of voluntary. And and finally, this was really something that came to my mind. I was also teaching about this, and so it's very striking. And we could perhaps think. I think we can imagine to put in 2 columns some text by, I don't know, Voices of Das, or this guy's more the philosophical Faculty of Arts, and perhaps some text explaining the scene of the rebel angels. And I would, as a hypothesis, I have no idea if this really works, but I would hope there are some path of dialogue between these two. Okay, and that's it. And I would like to thank you, Tobias, for this wonderful book. Thank you, congratulations for presenting with the work from which we can learn a great deal. I really can affirm it without any problem. The work from which we can learn a great deal, and also a work which shows itself as a great incentive for further research in our area of studies, which is also very important. He doesn't only teach us, but opens us for another doors, another ideas. For instance, this idea, I don't know if it were this idea of connecting the image of the demon with the image of the Lord, etc. I think that's important for a book, just also to give the reader some opportunities of other connections and connections with the author didn't make, but with the author make it possible. I think that's something very, very important, and shows a generosity also from the intellectual point of view. In order to present a kind of investigation from it, you are also generous and saying, and now from this, perhaps people can think other things. And I think your book is a wonderful book. Do both things, teach us and open us many other doors to think about the medieval philosophical landscape. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
I think the easiest is if I continue in English. I think I will communicate much better than if in the discussion, possibly I might try to respond in Spanish, but I think in the end it's better, no? Well, let me also start with thanking Natalia Jacobecki and Valeria Buffon and everybody who has contributed to putting together this workshop. I've already enjoyed immensely the first part in Santa Fe. And Rodrigo, your comments are extremely generous.
No,
it's wonderful. We all know how much work it is, and how sometimes, yeah, we work. We are faithful every day. While I was writing the book, what I had in front of me was just a black door, 8 hours a day. 6 days a week. Yeah, so it's wonderful to see that our efforts.
For how long?
Well, for how long, he asks. I think, well, the
reading part.
The 4 chapters of the book were done in about a year, but then other chapters. It's hard to say how long it took to write it, because a lot of the ideas were already prepared. So I think this book summarizes probably 25 years of research, and yeah. But then in the end, I think I spent about 5 years working on it in earnest. With not 5, just 1 year that I had a sabbatical.
No, okay, but
it takes
the
time.
text.
It takes time, yes, for sure. It takes a lot of time. Well, if I can immediately respond to this provocation, the thing is, I wanted to see for each author, there are certain problems that you mentioned about free will. You did a wonderful job in pointing out some of these problems. A choice should be rational, and a choice should have alternative possibilities, and there's a tension. If it's rational, it seems that the reasons predetermine the choice, and if there are really alternative possibilities, then it seems that the reasons don't really matter that much, right? Or they matter, but they don't ultimately matter. So if there is this philosophical problem, which then is connected with problems of psychology, so the big problem at the time was the connection between cognition and volition. Cognition and volition, in other terms, intellect and will. Well, then I come to every author with a set of questions, and to see whether or not he has an answer. Well, unfortunately, I cannot simply read some proof texts you know, you have, if you simply write about free will, then you just say, in this author, I take this text and that. Well, for every author, I had to read everything on the topic, right? Everything he somewhere says in some collimatal text or whatever. So it was an immense amount of just text. In addition, while I'm talking, but then I'm going to go back to some of the more systematical things. In addition, I was not satisfied with the dominant narrative, which was my initial hypothesis. In general, the dominating narrative is that in the 13th century, Aquinas and César Brabant and a few others, of course, Gabriel Fontaine, put forth a strong intellectualist account. What does it mean, intellectualist? The way I use the term, it means that the choices are set once the reasons are set. Once the deliberation is done, the choice is determined. Okay, so and then the narrative goes that in the 14th century, with Duns Scotus and then Occam, everybody goes voluntarist. Somewhat by chance, I discovered for me, he's known, but I discovered for me a disciple of Godfrey, so an intellectualist, John of Pouilly, of whom a few texts are edited, a few texts on free will, but the most interesting one was unedited. And so for me, part of this book meant also really to kind of do a preliminary edition, at least of 200 texts. This edition will, and soon it's going to be finished. And anyway, so there's this challenge that for each author, this is all a kind of a long response to your question, how long did it take? For each author, I had to take everything into account, and I wanted to have a more balanced account. And also, and this is for me very dear, this is maybe a discovery for me, but something that I think every one of you or many of you have discovered. It's very interesting to look not just at say, Aquinas, Scotus, Occam. So it's very interesting to look at the less famous authors for many reasons, which I cannot now say in all detail, but in part because they may have been the ones who set the scene, who set the tone of the debate at the time. Many times who became important was the case for contingent reasons. For example, a religious order pushes a certain author, and then in the 16th century it puts out text printed editions. So, but anyway, this is a big topic which I have to kind of restrict myself of not going too much into. But secondary authors, in particular, if they integrate it into a narrative, become really interesting. And also in one book reviewer in particular, somebody pointed out that he liked very much that we were introduced to somebody who was unknown, basically. I mean, was not so much part of the conversation. I want to pick out a few things now that you said. Other things. First of all, I thank you that you really pointed out clearly that for me, this is a book about free will. It's not so much, sorry if I disappoint anybody, it's not so much a book for me on angels. So when my friends ask me, oh, so you're an expert on angels, so I always wanted to know more about my guardian angel. Well, it's not at all that I want to ridiculize this view. Who's be told I myself believe in guardian angels. So it's not to ridiculize a religious view, but this book is not about angels as much as about problems that come out, and you pointed that out quite clearly, that come out very clearly when you have when you reduce the parameters to few parameters. Now with angels, we only have to deal with cognition and volition. There are no interferences from the passions. Even with cognition and volition, things are simplified. In the religious setting of these authors, were for human beings, there's original sin. Willing already is not willing in a pure state, right? It's already biased. right? Cognition for us also, it has all the problems that come along with rational cognition, simply because it's discursive, but also with biases that we take even from our education. And then, so with angels, everything is simplified. You have, well, you have not even a prehistory. So it's not about who educated me, was I lucky that I have good parents, or did I have good influences? So no, here the hypothesis is that right at the beginning of their existence, and then the authors discuss maybe a few moments after the existence, maybe a little bit more than a few moments, but since Jesus in the Gospel said, he was your father is Satan, and Satan was a liar from the start. The medieval theologians say he sinned right away. So you really have somebody who just fresh out of the factory, so to speak, right? The car fresh out of the factory and already gets into an accident, right? And so what happens? What went wrong? And there you have now the problems that you also pointed out. While intellectualists who ultimately, for very, very good philosophical reasons, face choices in, well, of course, our reasons, and therefore our knowledge, maybe we could say the way we use our knowledge, the way we have, but here, the angels, by hypothesis, had similar, well, maybe not exactly the same cognitive points. The Christian authors think that some angels had better cognition, others a little less, but nobody had flawed cognition. Nobody had error. Nobody had ignorance. Ignorance is when we do not know something that we should know. They could have nescience, they say, lack of knowledge. So they may not have known all the mysteries, says, for example, Aquinas, all the mysteries of salvation. So, yeah, so then, and I like this American expression, everyone in the debate has to bite the bullet. Do you know that expression, right? So it's meaning you have a bullet in your mouth, and if you bite it, maybe it explodes, right? And so it's kind of, you can also call it the nuclear option. It's like everybody at some point is pushed to the limit. And therefore, I want to pick up another thing that you pointed that was quite clear in your presentation. That is, you said, well, we talk about voluntarists, we talk about intellectualists, we talk about intermediary people. And then you said, but in the end, it looks like there are only intellectualists and voluntarists. Now, my provocation would be this. Maybe there are no voluntarists and there are no intellectualists. Maybe there are only intermediary positions. Why? Because I mentioned the image of biting a bullet, because in the end, since it is philosophically, I mean, they have not managed, I have not managed, you seem not to have managed to put together that we always act for a reason. So free choices are not free unless they are rational choices. And yet we assume that we could have done otherwise. And in some strong sense, at least for the Christians, not in some weak compatibilist sense, right? Well, so in the end, they see sometimes some people are more overtly, others more secretly make concessions. So therefore, for example, to get a very strong intellectualist like Godfrey of Fontaine, and then to get Godfrey of Fontaine and the updated version, Godfrey of Fontaine 2.0, John of Pouilly, who has exactly the same mindset, who says of himself that he doesn't want to say anything beyond what his master Godfrey has said, and then who develops in much detail. So when in the end he says, yeah, so of course the voluntarists, I mean, nobody uses those labels, of course, right? But of course, Henry of Ghent, of course, he makes no sense, and this is ridiculous. But in the end, so how does he explain free will? Well, the angels how does he explain free will in this hard case of the angels? Well, the angels could be negligent. or they could be attentive. Some were negligent, and so then they fell into error and they sinned, and the others were diligent, right? Okay, but here is the nuclear option, right? Here he pulled the plug and he said, okay, basically, why were some negligent and why were some diligent? Here we reach the end of any rational explanation, right? So yeah, so therefore this point that I made is maybe in the end everybody ends up being in this intermediate position of taking something of intellectualism and taking something of voluntarism. Here I gave an example on the intellectualist side. I would like to give an example on the voluntarist side. One author who is absolutely fantastic and always extremely worth reading is John Olivi. And for good reasons, he's become very, very popular, right? I mean, in secondary literature and theses and things. So John Olivi, who has pretty much the same moral psychology as Henry of Ghent, which means a very pronounced voluntarist approach. Simply, the decision maker in the end is the will, even apart from, well, not exactly apart from, but beyond the input of judgment and of reason. Well, when he comes to explain the fall of the angels, he tries to go a very long way to make rational sense of the sin of the angels, quite like Anselm of Canterbury, more than any other author I've seen at the time. So Aquinas has a lot to say about, for example, how angelic sin is possible, but he's very silent about which might have been the reasons for the sin, right? Except for saying, well, it was typical patristic view that it was pride, but pride is not really giving a reason. It's just describing, but it's not explaining what happened. But Olivi, from his decidedly voluntarist viewpoint, while he gives a quite, let's say, anthropomorphic explanation, but while because somehow he's trying to make sense of this, and he said, well, Lucifer, for one, he felt like, well, he rebelled. I forgot now for exactly which reason, but why did the other angels, because the narrative goes that Lucifer was the first to sin and some other angels followed him. Why did the other angels follow, and why did he want to be followed in this sin? Well, then he says Lucifer felt aggrandized. He felt bigger, if he felt worth more, so to speak. Like a king who feels more, when bigger, if he has a big kingdom and he has many followers. So he wanted to be followed in his act. Why did other people want to follow other angels? Well, because Lucifer was very, he had a very seducing character, so to speak. And he kind of suggests, well, if you're with me, you count. You are somebody. I'm the boss here. I'm the biggest angel. So if you're my friend, it's like in politics. Like if you know somebody important, you feel like you have more power. And so this is to say, I don't know if I remember all the details exactly well, but this is kind of funny. He says we should not imagine the sin of the angels as if simply, he gives this example, as if simply a holy nun from 1 minute to the next offers herself to every passerby. So somehow, if something was corrupted, it must have gone over time, and there must be some rational development. This is to say, also a strong voluntarist tries to go toward the reason side, right? And so in the end, maybe there are only intermediate positions. And now I'm going to be extremely short if I can still take a minute. Yes or not? So thank you for suggesting this view together, to somehow make a connection between these philosophical Aristotelians, like Poesis of Dacia, or so, where basically, where the ethical position, meaning the decisions in life, are very much seen from a very Aristotelian point of view. There might be something to that, because in a way, Aristotle's agent is also in some way an idealized agent. If you think of it at least from the Christian point of view, right? So the Christians have, well, you study Augustine, so the Christians have the theory of original sin, and so therefore there's already a lot going wrong in our psychology even before we do anything. And while in Aristotle there's none of that, and so in Aristotle it seems that the way that he explains choice, of course, his problem is neither to explain free will. That's not his issue at all. If anything, he wants to account for voluntariness. But he has no problem of saying that there must be alternative possibilities. Maybe they're not. That's too bad. But then for him, it seems like choices are done according, of course, to deliberation. And if anything goes wrong, it's not even so much his problem whether it's your fault, because maybe simply because you had bad education, well, then it's too bad. But anyway, so if you enjoyed a good education, and if you're a free citizen, and if you have some of these ideal conditions that Aristotle also develops somewhat in the politics and definitely, I mean, also in the ethics, then maybe you are like the Christian angel.
So you have developed all your intellectual capabilities and everything works.
Right, and so that and this is not going to be my last sentence, which then can be interesting. The question is always, when you talk about medieval philosophy, where there are all these theological presuppositions, are you really doing philosophy? At least I convinced my publisher that I am doing philosophy. Okay, of course, all of the Christian presuppositions become thought experiment if you want to, I mean, they become like a hypothesis, but then it's still something that allows us to think about our human action under idealized presuppositions, and then of course we have to bring them back to the messy conditions which are ours. But even when you pointed out obstinacy, right? Mm-hmm. Obstinacy, the fact that once the angels made a good choice, well, that's not about obstinacy. The good angels could no longer go back to sin, and that's easy to explain because they were in the beatific vision. They see God. God is desirable from every point of view. There's no reason, no attraction anymore to go otherwise. But the obstinacy is a real problem.
Why is that for you?
Well, because why? And even somebody like Thomas is very explicit. They're still voluntarily in their state of obstinacy, meaning they don't want to suffer, but they still continue the position of their rebellious will. Why, if you are so free that you could make your first choice, what is it that then puts you in a position that no longer makes you see the other side? Now, of course, there would be possible connections with addictions or so, but I think that would not be a very good connections with exactly those debates. But it's interesting to think about why we may be stuck sometimes in a certain view, right, and in a certain position. And I think to say because of habits, that it's not enough. It's not enough. It doesn't explain enough. Thanks a lot. I spoke way too long, but just because you gave me so many setups. Yeah, assisted. Assists, yes.
No, yeah. I think we should open to public phone. No.
Some precision to make or anything else.
Pues en castellano.
Muy bien, gracias.
No, es que yo le comentaba al profesor que empecé hace poco a ver el tema de la tecnología, y vi más que nada la parte segunda y tercera de este libro, que lo he bajado nosotros, y claro, lo pude bajar, pero que en realidad yo quería hacerme algunos comentarios o consultas sobre temas míos que yo he leído de los autores y quería saber tu posición, digamos, ¿no?
Sí.
Yo le ponía acá que, aunque no incluye en el libro la época de John Wycliffe, que
sí.
es, o sea, el pensador que estudié en la tesis, porque usted aclara que el periodo que trabaja es de 1220 a 1320 aproximadamente. Me gustaría saber qué opina sobre lo que destaca un autor, David Bucombe, que toma un pasaje que yo lo copié atrás y puse en mi versión castellana, digamos, un pasaje de un tratado de Wycliffe, Tratado de Iglesia, del capítulo 15, y Bucombe indica que para Wycliffe el hecho de que el arcángel Miguel, que está ubicado en la tríada más baja, más inferior de los ángeles, sea el jefe de las huestes celestiales y venza a Lucifer, que es el ángel más alto en la jerarquía, habilitaría en la tierra a los sectores inferiores a enfrentarse a los superiores. Los ángeles no solo serían entonces modelos de orden, sino también de rebelión. Bucombe dice que ninguno de los otros pensadores medievales había calificado así la interpretación de la jerarquía del pseudo Dionisio. A la luz de la revuelta de Miguel contra Lucifer, hace una interpretación que ninguno otro lo habría hecho. Solo Wycliffe lo hace, en realidad quiere demostrar más que nada que el clero no es digno, que los súbditos entonces se pueden rebelar legalmente, que las propiedades eclesiásticas pueden ser confiscadas, ¿no? Wycliffe distingue entre la iglesia y el clero, la única iglesia verdadera es la invisible, y bueno, entonces digamos, el inferior tiene poder de corregir e incluso de llegar a rebelarse contra el superior, porque el mismo Papa podría no estar entre los predestinados directamente. Y quería saber si le merece algún comentario.
Sí, soy yo que agradezco esta información que no sabía, no conocía esta posición de Wycliffe. Me parece muy interesante. Entonces, muchas gracias por... sí, yo... lo que me parecía cuando cuando estudiaba el tema por mi libro, es que el interés a la jerarquía de los ángeles baja. Sí, en Buenaventura todavía encontramos páginas y páginas y páginas muy cercas de Dionisio, ¿cómo se llama? Dionisio, ¿no? Entonces, sí, todavía en Tomás, pero ya en la suma, no, sí, hay en el final de la prima paz, pero no encontré nadie que hacía una conexión entre el pecado y la jerarquía. Sí, a veces sí. La jerarquía solamente entra en juego en cuanto Lucifer es el más alto y entonces sí, tiene un cierto privilegio, entonces sí, tiene una autoridad natural, por eso antes hablé de Olivier, que dijo por qué otros ángeles seguían Lucifer, pero no, yo no encontré, y quizás a la época que estudié, sí, Ockham entonces tiene muchas obras políticas sobre la autoridad del Papa. Admito que no leí a Gilles de Rome, Egidio Romano. No tengo mucha, no tengo una foto, no tengo mucha para decir, ¿no? Eso, pero me parece muy interesante.
Sí, un uso, digamos, político.
Sí. ¿Tú quieres dar algo?
Ustedes van a comentar la pregunta. Hay que llamar a mi de conservación. No, así la tiene castellano. Respecto al comentario central de Rodrigo sobre, o sea, yo lo que entendí de Rodrigo es que no hay, el voluntarista no tiene demasiadas razones para ser voluntarista, o esas, o me equivoco. O sea,
En general,
o bueno, no entendí, pero como que si no hay justificación, si hay justificación de la razón,
sí.
la voluntad tiene que subsumirse, tiene que obedecer la razón. ¿O cuál sería el argumento fundamental de un voluntarista para decir que hay una primacía de la voluntad en el acto, digamos, moral?
Ah, sí, porque ella podría escoger entre dos razones sin la necesidad de escoger la razón que ella tiene como la más fuerte.
Simplemente porque así lo quiere.
Ah, sí, ahí llegamos, sí, ahí llegamos a esto que había ahí en el WhatsApp del grupo, ¿no? Quiero porque quiero, no sé qué más fueron, bla, bla, bla. Ahí llegamos de ¿cómo dice Wittgenstein? ¿Dónde la... No, sí, ahí sí, es verdad. Esto, ¿por qué? Porque la voluntad es la voluntad.
¿Pero a vos te parece una buena opción filosófica esa?
Bueno, yo te digo, la respuesta que te doy no es una respuesta racional, es una respuesta del punto de vista de la hipótesis, y después vamos a intentar traducir esta hipótesis de manera consistente. Sí. No, yo soy más. Pero yo veo los problemas. Este es el punto, porque, no sé, no. Cuando dices que las tres posiciones en el fondo son la posición intermediaria, del punto de vista de mi reconstrucción, yo no quería llegar a este punto, porque la posición intermediaria es, por excelencia, en mi lectura, claro, la posición inconsistente.
Sí,
Sí.
eso es un problema. Sí, pero sí, nadie admite que su teoría no es completa, ¿no? Que no explica todo. Sí. Pero sí, hay una cosa muy interesante. Sí, cuando hablé en el fondo, quizás de todos son una posición con tendencias intelectualistas más que voluntaristas, pero hay también una cuestión que se pone con la cuestión de la posibilidad del pecado del ángel, es que si el pecado, si voler mal, presupone un defecto de la razón o del intelecto, un defecto cognitivo o cognoscitivo, ¿no? ¿Sí? Y las respuestas históricamente las respuestas a esta pregunta son 2 y no 3. Desaparece la posición intermediaria porque hay solo 2 posibilidades. O sea, ¿no? El pecado, el voler mal, presupone un error o una deficiencia cognitiva, o no. Los voluntaristas y los de la posición intermedia dicen que no presupone, porque el problema es que no quiere decir que el mal sigue necesariamente de algo que no es en el poder de ellos. Porque si el error ya es un error, una ignorancia, no una ignorancia afectada, sí, una ignorancia vincibile, ¿no? Vencible, sí, es vencible, ya presupone un pecado tener la ignorancia, para decirlo de manera más fácil. La ignorancia o disculpa, o excusa del pecado o no explica el pecado, ¿no? Entonces sí, entonces hay las 2 posiciones. Los intelectualistas todavía dicen que tiene que haber una cualquier deficiencia cognitiva y nosotros no. Sí, pero es siempre tener todo junto. Ayer, ¿no? Cuando hablaste de Hardworth, todos los problemas existen todavía en Hardworth, ¿no? Y también en Pomponazzi.
También en Peter Van Inwagen. Este es el problema. Estamos en una situación mejor del punto de vista filosófico que estaban en el siglo III. Y quizás estamos en una situación peor porque ahora tenemos esta posición del hard incompatibilism que quizás sea la más inconsistente de las dos.
Quiere decir que tenemos que cerrar las prisiones.
No,
Natalia.
Yo quería decir que así como estas posiciones continúan, hay un origen, sobre todo, obviamente metí a la para mí, pero están avelando sobre todo el tema de la ignorancia visible, invencible e invencible, de lo que escribió Christophe el año pasado en el libro La posibilidad de la tolerancia.
El italiano, el libro italiano, sí.
Que muestra
La posibilidad de la tolerancia.
Sí, lo reseñé y lo leí, no me lo acuerdo. En definitiva, muestra esto, cómo está el origen, al menos de una de las líneas argumentativas sobre el tema de excusar el pecado por ignorancia. Una de las líneas, no justamente la línea que no lo excusa. Pero bueno, ya que están hablando a futuro, yo...
Y también puede ser voluntario, no sé.
Sí, claro. Sí, bueno, ahí se resuelve de otra.
oh, mira. Wow.
Ahí queda más tarde, pero
Sí, sí, yo me gusta, pero esta es más una curiosidad, porque hay una situación que describes. I will talk in English. There's a situation you describe in your book, I think two or not very, in some parts, that would be the case that the rebel angel, he would have a justification of his action, and this justification would point towards the goodness of God. You said he bets. That's very interesting situation, I think, because the rebel angel says, well, I want to be like, not the same. Well, we know that's it's not a quest for identity with God, but I want to be God-like. I know that this is perhaps something that I could not want to be godlike, but oh, he's good.
Yeah.
Me. Well, and then I bet that he will do this, but he doesn't. That's the problem. Where is the problem here? Is he having a bad understanding of what means to be good for God? Is this the point, or is it another point?
But here, yeah, first of all, let me acknowledge my source for this idea. It's Peter King, who gave a wonderful talk many years ago, where he basically said, this is Anselm of Canterbury, whom you're describing, and he basically said that Anselm is the inventor of rational decision theory. So he bets with outcomes. So he wants, if he can, I mean, Anselm said he doesn't know what the sin consisted in. So Peter King said, let's just call that sin. He wants to sit on God's throne, right? So he wants to sit on God's throne, and also he does not want to be punished, and he thinks he can have both. That's a higher outcome than if he, if his will is frustrated, he doesn't sit on God, and he's not punished. So he develops this idea, then in the end, he published a version of that in my Companion on Angels, the Will companion book. So if you're interested, I thought that was a really interesting, and I think that's true. And what is the philosophical point of that? It's that Anselm, I mentioned this earlier, he goes out of his way to, that means he makes every effort to explain that Lucifer's sin was rational. This is exactly the point that you made. And I think nobody did this as well as Anselm. And he was very keenly aware of why he needed that, very much for the reason that you said. If Lucifer's sin is not rational, then it's not voluntary, then it's not free, and then it doesn't deserve punishment, but forgiveness. So how the rationality is, and this is not how Anselm explains it, since he's the first person in the universe to sin, there's no example at hand of what happens if you sin. But he was sufficiently smart to know that God is just, that God can punish, but he also knew that God is merciful. And he has so empirically, there was no example at hand to see whether God would in the end, really use his justice and not his mercy. And so he just bet on it, right? Like Pascal's wager, in a certain sense, in a kind of negative sense, right? But anyway, this kind of rational decision theory bet.
And according to some,
Here's our 12th century.
and according to some theologians from this center, he was possibly right? Because you have this, I think it's Tauhane says that the hell is empty.
It's Bartas or Weisman's hypothesis. Yes.
Origins.
Yes. And he got into trouble, let's say.
Yeah, of course.
No, quería decir que no sé si estoy tan de acuerdo con que el pecado del demonio anselmiano sea racional, pero antes de disentir, me gustaría leer, Peter King escribió, bueno, después me gustaría leer primero los argumentos que quizá me convencen, pero en principio no sé si...
Sí, toda la cuestión es ¿qué entendemos con racional? ¿No? Racional de un punto de vista exterior, del observador, no es racional, pero racional en el sentido que tengo razones, no hago por razones, y no es un...
Es tanto limitativo.
Sí.
Eligió lo que sabía que el cómodo común, ¿no? Por sobre por sobre la justicia.
Sí.
Entonces, en ese sentido, bueno, sí, es deliberado.
Sí.
Esto termina eso porque quiso.
Sí, es verdad.
pero después volvemos a probar. Claro, deliberado también, tengo dos deliberaciones, pero una es reconocida como menos fuerte que la otra. ¿Por qué entonces yo escojo la misma?
No,
Que es más cómodo.
no,
Claro, él podía elegir y es verdad que eligió. En ese sentido, cuando hay elección, se supone que hay una mínima deliberación previa. Pero bueno, es eso, también es como, ¿por qué hizo? ¿Por qué pudo? Pero
sí, claro.
fui a un interés.
No, no, sí, soy de acuerdo, sí, soy...
Porque
La verdad es que la respuesta no llega lejos, porque sí, escogió esta la menos fuerte porque era la más cómoda. Pero ¿por qué escogió la más cómoda y no la más justa? Entonces la pregunta vuelve en el punto parecido.
claro, hay un incompatibilista al respecto. O sea, no me quedo incompatibilista entre qué y qué.
Entre
Determinismo y
libertad, sí.
determinismo no habla de la necesidad exterior.
El tema es que además una vez que decide, no puede cambiar.
Según la tradición cristiana, sí, según la...
Sí, no es como el hombre.
Es una pregunta sobre
Sí.
Muy chiquitita para que de alguna manera parece que la pregunta de Anselmo es como más radical, un de malo. O sea, no es eso. Está bien, puede ser una cuestión de voluntad o no, pero ¿de dónde? No es que es como que se hace una cuestión ontológica que se podría cambiar a Agustín, es un ¿de dónde?
Sí.
¿De dónde proviene eso que es, en principio, la opción?
Sí.
Esa pregunta me parece más radical.
Claro.
Es anterior a si es un acto voluntario o no. Y que, bueno, no sé, el problema es que
Sí,
más o menos.
no, este libro tiene tres partes, ¿no? La segunda parte se titula Unde Malum, Whence Evil en inglés, ¿no? Unde Malum, porque allí el tema no es, no es psicológico, es más metafísico que psicológico. Unde Malum buscamos una causa. Y Agustín, yo creo que Agustín tiene una razón muy fuerte que no puede ser una causa efectiva. Entonces habla de una causa defectiva, pero la causa defectiva no es una causa efectiva deficiente. No es una causa efectiva. Entonces...
¿Efectiva
no,
positiva?
Sí, no hay una causa por Agustín, ¿no? Sí, entonces dice, no hay causa en el sentido, no hay causa efectiva.
Porque el mal es privación.
Claro.
También por eso. Sí. Entonces, este problema, todos lo inheritan, ¿se dice? Heredan, sí, de Agustín. Sí.
La hago primero en inglés, tal vez después la
Okay.
Regarding the question of the angelic nature that you chose as your topic, I find it fascinating. I couldn't read the book yet. I'm very inclined to but to use it as a kind of laboratory of intellect and will and the mutual relationship. And leaving aside all the other nuisances of humanity. But I was wondering, since we both were speaking about obstinacy and the possibility of change, how does that relate to the angelic nature or the demonic nature in those centuries? Because in antiquity there was no problem with change in the intellectual nature.
Yeah.
But there was, I think, I speak from the ignorance, of course, of any of these authors, but how do that, where's the possibility of change or repentance?
Yeah. You said you wanted to speak in...
No, le pregunto sobre, tomando como caso testigo la cuestión de los ángeles, como para discutir con más pureza, si quiero, abstracción a cuestión del libre albedrío, cómo lo compatibiliza con la imposibilidad de cambio, de arrepentimiento en el caso de sangre.
Yeah. For me, but I answer mainly in a historical way. Okay. For me, it was very striking to see that all the answers to the problem, of obstinacy always indicated an external cause to the angel. So not a psychological cause, but an external cause, meaning God does not give the grace of repentance, or God, more positively, God punishes in a way that they are stuck in evil. So very interestingly, I find, historically speaking, to my knowledge, Thomas Aquinas is the first who continues, he accepts these traditional patristic explanations, but he also tries to find a psychological cause. And that is where this chapter becomes interesting for me. Because again, for me, I'm interested in moral psychology, yeah, right? So, and what is this internal cause for Aquinas? It's the intellect. Since the angelic intellect proceeds not discursively, once the angel knows something, it's fixed in that. And now, since the will cannot will differently from the intellect without that there is a change in the intellect, right? So if the intellect does not change, the will does not change. And so the will is eternal. But then in the end, Thomas even realizes that this cannot be the last explanation, because God, out of his absolute power, and he very clearly speaks about not out of his ordained power, he uses that expression there, not out of his ordained power, but out of his absolute power, he could bring Lucifer, he could give him the grace, right? He could overpower, so to speak, this psychological. And then so Thomas, I'm gonna make a side note. I was one of the book reviews says I'm really a Thomist, because Thomas becomes kind of always. I say that Thomas sets up the issues and stuff. I'm not sure I'm a Thomist. I don't think so. But I think historically he does set up the issues, and then there's somewhat you can't go past Thomas, kind of like you can't go past Kant, and as we say often today, right? So then Henry of Ghent gets this problem on the table. I need to find a psychological cause. Of course, it cannot be Thomas's explanation, because he rejects this connection between Henry of Ghent connects this strict connection between the will and the intellect. And so Henry says, well, it's the will who's so much with like the angelic will that is so perfect, and it goes with so much conatus, so I don't know which word he uses, with so much elan, goes into the object that it can't go out, and uses the image like as if I take a sword and I hit it into your bones, heaven forbid. But if I do, then the more I hit you, the more difficulty I have to pull it out. So, but of course, this does not work as an explanation either. Don't worry, you're not going to try it out. We know it for philosophy, not for empirical reasons. So, anyway, he sets the issue on the table, and in the end, nobody manages to give an explanation. So they all come back that in the last analysis, it is just because God doesn't give the grace, or because God punishes.
Puedo hacer una consulta, ¿no? O sea, se podría ver entre la diferencia, digamos, de la caída angélica y la caída del humano. Es algo muy simple, pero no sé si lo interpreto bien. Considerando, siguiendo a Tomás, y creo que muchos siguen a Tomás en eso, que considera a cada ángel una especie. Los ángeles, cuando caen de a uno, digamos, cada uno toma la decisión, ¿no? O sea, en cambio,
caso del humano, cae la primera pareja y arrastra a todos.
Claro.
O sea, también, digamos, esa interpretación de que sería como que es el momento de la conversión o de la versión, es individual dentro en el ángel porque es una especie. Esa sería, digamos, para mí una diferencia fundamental entre los dos pecados y las dos caídas.
Sí, sí, claro que los ángeles, cada uno toma su decisión, y los hombres, yo no he decidido de tener el pecado original, ¿no? Yo no estuve en el jardín, en el paraíso. Ecco, sí, pero yo filosóficamente y también históricamente no creo que es fundamental que cada ángel es su especie. Entonces es una posición, la de Tomás, muchas personas no lo seguían en esto. Todos los que no dicen que la materia es el principio de individuación, entonces Scotto no lo admite. Otra vez es muy interesante Olivier, porque Olivier tampoco considera que el intelecto del ángel es muy distinto del intelecto del hombre. Sí, para él es como un intelecto humano, por entonces, sí, por eso, para Olivier, pero también para entonces un ángel puede evolver en el conocimiento, ¿no? Es para decir que la angelología de Tomás es bastante precisa y no es opinión común.
O sea que, digamos, la gran diferencia sería en que el ángel hace la elección individual.
Sí, eso.
No que sea,
sí,
o sea, no es así como nada, digamos, que, bueno, el origen bíblico, que buscando. En cambio, lo de especie sería para Tomás y algunos que lo siguen. O sea, la diferencia básica sería la elección individual.
Eso es, sí.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Todavía la cuestión de la potencia absoluta no desempeña un papel muy relevante aquí.
No.
Porque solo para que se me torne claro, porque de potencia absoluta sería posible la salvación de los demonios.
Claro.
Sí,
Lo dice también.
Sí, a todo, ¿no?
Lo dice también Tomás, ¿no? Tomás dice que sí, porque no es posible de la potencia ordinaria. Eso es la verdadera cuestión, ¿no? Que sea posible de la potencia absoluta no es un problema. ¿Por qué no es posible de la potencia ordinaria? Porque Dios no hace violencia a la natura del individuo. Entonces, si el ángel toma su decisión, es como si Dios la respeta. Respecta no solo la decisión, pero respecta la dinámica natural.
¿Pero la decisión implica un cambio de naturaleza?
No, ¿por qué?
Eso entendí.
No, sí, no implica un cambio de naturaleza, no.
La naturaleza del que decir.
Sí, el único problema es que el pecado impide el don de la gracia sobrenatural, ¿no? Es que todo eso no es filosofía, eso es la teología, ¿no? Es que una vez que los ángeles tomaron una decisión de un modo u otro, los que tomaron la buena decisión recibieron la gracia sobrenatural que permitía la beatitud completa, que es la visión de Dios. ¿No? Pero no hay cambio cambiamiento de naturaleza. Siempre muy interesante hablar del libre albedrío, de los árboles, y cuando se combinan.
Es siempre muy interesante, pero muy... las cuestiones se acumulan. Un poco frustrante.
Ya que están hablando de naturaleza, a mí me parece en este debate como el hecho de que de considerar al intelecto como naturaleza y en ese sentido que sea una naturaleza que que actúa por necesidad, una naturaleza que conoce por una ciencia y la ciencia es de lo necesario, entonces la naturaleza conlleva una cierta necesidad. Creo que el establecer esa característica del intelecto como naturaleza es lo que hace que se rompa la unidad con la voluntad, porque hablaban de Anselmo, donde está bien que no hay intelecto, pero está la razón y la voluntad. La voluntad es racional. Un día discutiendo con Nati, yo siempre ando buscando como ustedes, ando buscando estos problemas para atrás y como que me rebotan. Y Nati me dice, no, la razón quiere y la voluntad es racional. No hay nada que rompa el momento en el proceso en el que el intelecto se vuelve una naturaleza y por tanto con un comportamiento necesario, ahí hay que romper.
Sí, el intelecto...
Porque si continúan trabajando junto con la voluntad ya no es libre.
Sí, en otras palabras, si el acto del intelecto es necesario y el acto de la voluntad no es necesario, tiene que haber una división, sí, eso sí. Sí.
Entonces, el proceso a mí me interesa históricamente
Sí.
el momento, el proceso, cómo eso se va dando en los autores. Se ven pequeños.
Yo creo que ya en Tomás hay... Sí, lo que es necesario es la ciencia. El ángel no tiene el control, no, it's not up to the angel what he knows, no what he considers, no, what he knows is not... no, es que porque por Tomás todos los ángeles tienen todas las ciencias, todo el saber por infusión al principio de la existencia. Y entonces, esto es interesante, no controlan lo que saben, pero controlan cómo usan lo que saben. Porque una cosa es lo que sé, otra cosa es a qué pienso, el actus, ¿cómo se llama? No el actus secundus, pero también ya en Aristóteles hay el de ánima. Una cosa es... saber, una otra cosa es sí,
saber y potencia primera.
Sí. Entonces, en Tomás, esto es el momento voluntarista, cuando dije que todos tienen que hacer compromisos, ¿no? Este es el momento voluntarista en Tomás, que dice, por lo menos para los ángeles, que sí consideran o no lo que deberían considerar para evitar el pecado, era en el poder de la voluntad. En la misma explicación es la de Tomás, la del primer mal, ¿no? en el caso del ángel o en el caso del hombre, cómo es posible que una buena voluntad comienza a ser mala. Y otra vez se explica que es que lo que si considero una regla o no, es cuestión solo de la voluntad. Entonces es un voluntarismo parcial, por lo menos.
Sí.
Por consideración de las reglas.
Eso, sí. Sí, sí. En el de malo 1, 3.
Quiero seguir preguntando. Pero me callo para no parecer.
La hora.
Ya es la hora.
Honor a ella que estaba.
¿Quieren descansar?
No lo podemos considerar bien, no podemos participar, no podemos.
¿Quieren comer también?
Pero Valeria es como una alta.
Deberíamos cuidar la libertad y la voluntad en Valeria.
Bueno, entonces, vos que estás en cámara, sigue pensando.
Sí, sí, wow. No.
Tu pensamiento. Es cierto, porque como yo no estoy en cámara, no puedo saber nada.
No, yo repito que agradezco muchísimo la invitación, el comentario de Rodrigo. Es un placer inmenso estar en América del Sur, en Argentina por la primera vez. Y gracias.
Gracias a vos. Preguntas en YouTube. A ver, vamos a ver. Pero ¿cómo se ve esto, Che?
No hay preguntas.
Estaba cerrado.
Sí,